Hi, and welcome to week 2. So, what we're going to look at today is understanding why we do what we do, understanding self-talk and how to maybe turn it from being negative all the time to a little bit more positive and learning how to catch yourself when you're doing it, as well as understanding control. So, first of all, why do we do what we do? It's a bit obvious. We kind of know what we do because we gather that it's through upbringing and all the rest of it. But do we really understand why? So first of all, obviously we're born, and when we're born, we're exposed to a world full of colours, of noise, of sounds, and we probably can't absorb it all because we've got nothing to compare it to. It's interesting to know that the brain actually can only process between 7 plus or minus 2 things per second. And we are bombarded with millions of things. I don't exactly know the ins and outs of how many, I can't remember, but so much more than that. And we only retain between 5 and 9 things, which is quite interesting, but really, it's not so much between 5 and 9, it's chunks of attention. So things that we really retain are probably more like 3 or 4. And that's why sometimes if you're asleep or you remember certain things, because if you've got the TV on or you can hear people talk, you're not understanding and you're asleep, but it's still going in, if that makes sense. You're still absorbing this information. So that's why sometimes we kind of like recall something and we're not sure how or why, but it's how the brain works. So when we're born, obviously, our parents take over and they start to teach us about life, and what they're doing, they're imparting all the beliefs and values onto us and their own life experiences, what we have make them see the world in a particular way. So we then start to create what is called our map of the world. And one of the NLP presuppositions is that the map is not a territory, which kind of makes sense in that way because we understand that, we only see our little bit and it's not the entire country if we look at it in that way, or territory. But we don't necessarily understand why, other people could be so different from us, especially if we've got a twin or if people with twins. They're still going to have personalities that are completely different because they're going to be reacting to maybe the same thing but in different ways. That's how we start to build our own character. And in order to understand the world around us, we kind of have to filter it, which is also why we only see between 5 and 9 things a second, because it would be too much. We would be absolutely overwhelmed and we would not be able to function. So this filtering is done in various ways. Let me click, yeah, there you go. So first of all is deletions, right? It is, we can't see the little cross because my head's on top of it. Never mind. We delete information that we may find irrelevant. Attention is a limited resource, so we not notice certain things, but we notice others. It depends on our level of interest in those things. And in every situation, there's more going on than we realise. So most of the information that we delete is irrelevant to us, but actually sometimes we will overlook things that would have helped us if we did notice them. Then we distort. It's not so much distorting reality because we create our own reality, because of what I've just explained. We don't actually see the world in a different way at all. But distortions are more, it's an attempt to view the world and understand the world. We will attribute meanings to events, but based on our own map of the world. So these things, these distortions are, for instance, confirmation. So we pay more evidence, or more attention even, to evidence that actually supports our belief, as opposed to evidence that doesn't, that goes against what we believe in, because it doesn't suit us. Because it suits us to actually downplay or ignore evidence that doesn't support our own beliefs. Another distortion would be the bandwagon effect, which is when we're more likely to do or believe something when we see other people doing it themselves. If I take an example, if you take Facebook, we see an advert, we're probably more likely to click on that advert to find out about it if it says that such and such likes this page. Because we're like, oh, if you like the page, then it might be all right, so I'm going to have a look at it. Where if it's a called advert, we probably, unless it's something that's of particular interest to us, we probably won't even try to click on it. Another distortion is the illusion of control, where we believe that we can control or influence something even when we can't. So we will look for evidence or for information that, again, suits us. And then you've got the halo effect, which is another distortion, which is something that you really see when people start to date, I expect. Not expect, but, you know, it's a good example. Because, for instance, you will see traits or qualities of that person that actually reassure you then they're right for you. Because when we like someone, we're more likely to see their qualities than the flaws. And actually, when we don't like somebody, we're probably more looking for the flaws and we are the bits where we like. Again, going back to this confirmation bias of like looking for evidence that supports our beliefs. And then it's generalizations. That's the basis of all learning, and it's our perception, but it's how it's in the way we speak. It's in everything. I think when you start, we look at language patterns in a bit, and when you start to really listen to what people say, it is generalizations most over time. And a lot of the time, actually, these shortcuts, these things that we do here do help us because, you know, there's so much going on in the world, but if we had to pick it all up, we would not be able to function. Thinking is something that's extremely time consuming, but it's also extremely consuming in terms of energy. So we would not be able to function, basically. But the problem is that these shortcuts can also work against us because we then miss relevant bits of information. We jump to conclusions too quickly, or we assume, we judge, and that's not helpful. But once you understand that you're doing this, then, you know, you're halfway there in essence, because you can stop yourself. And don't get me wrong, it's not going to happen overnight. It is literally something that takes time, but you will get there. It's quite fascinating when you start really listening to yourself, but also to others. I know I find it really difficult at times because I'm saying something and I'm thinking, no, I've just generalized here. But we're also human. We can try and, you know, do it the right way, but we are human, and that's that really. So that's what we do it to a degree. We seek, oh, sorry, I just realized I forgot to click. We seek this, we seek confirmation that, you know, what we believe, what our values are is right. We need reassurance and confirmation. But what we also need to realize is that we actually create our own reality. It's a concept that I found really difficult to start off with, which was, oh God, years ago, even before I kind of like trained in this. I didn't understand how reality could not be real. And, you know, surely there's only one reality, because to me, like what you watched on the news, for instance, was reality. And I knew it wasn't, because I knew that, you know, they're only showing us what they want to show us and in the way they want to show it to us. But it was a concept that I really struggled with for some reason. But actually, what we experience is not reality. It's reality to us, but to nobody else. And it's quite, yeah, I don't know, most people probably get it straight away. I didn't. I just found it quite difficult. I guess also because obviously being French, and when I came here and I went to university, there was history, because I did international relations and politics and understanding, you know, war and why terrorism and stuff like that. And the story I was being told, which, you know, were facts about, let's say, whatever. I remember one particular one, which was about Israel and, you know, what happened in the 60s. And yet it was a completely different story about what had been taught in France. And that was quite weird, because I was like, how is this possible? That I didn't know this bit, and yet they're not saying about that. And I guess that was probably my first experience of this, that, you know, we concentrate on what we know. Another thing as well, for instance, in France, I never found out about the Falklands. I'm sure it was mentioned at some point, but I really did not know anything about it until I came to England. But now that I do understand it, I know that we all have our own reality, and it's based on our learning. And by the time you become aware of experiencing something, it's already been filtered. So your reality is that, your reality. No one else's. And that's what sometimes when you think something is really obvious to us, it's not to someone else. Freud said that reality, let me read this, was the ability of a mind to assess the external world and to act upon it accordingly. So we don't necessarily consciously choose to look at certain things. It's all unconscious. For instance, as you know, I help people with relationship issues. So in terms of like relationship issues with others and arguments and lack of communications and all the rest of it, we forget that we have obviously our map and we've got theirs. And the best way to actually get someone to understand your point of view is to go and try and understand theirs. Because once you understand theirs, you can bring them back towards you so that they can actually accept yours. And the reason why we don't do that is because we think our map is true and is right. And they think the same thing. So if you're both in your trenches actually thinking, no, I'm right anyway, so I'm not going to listen to you, and the other person's thinking the same thing, you're not going to go anywhere. Where if you're the first person to go towards them and try to understand their argument, their side of the story, shall we say, because you've made an effort, they're more likely to then come towards you and make an effort to understand your point of view. But it's also easier because you can then, once you understand theirs, you can use examples to then bring them back towards you so that we can relate to what you're trying to say. And I think this is the thing with our maps of the world and our reality. We ask ourselves sometimes the wrong questions. The map should be useful to us, not true, because yes, it's true to us, but to nobody else. And our truth is not the only truth. And we kind of forget that, especially when we relate to other people. We find our own way and they find theirs. And their view of reality is as valid as yours. But we don't always appreciate that, especially in the heat of an argument, for instance. And this is another reason why that is, which is ego. Now, ego is an issue to a degree for a lot of us, because believing that we're right all the time and not actually making an effort with others or understanding others or where they're coming from actually stops us as well from learning. So in terms of like why we do what we do is because it makes sense to us, and our action makes sense to us from our map. And sometimes we look at other people and their actions really don't make sense, but they do to them. They do according to their map. And it's difficult to understand at times. But for instance, another presupposition, which I think I mentioned last week, I will mention it at some point again anyway, is that behind every behaviour is a positive intention. That's another thing that I find difficult to accept to start off with. But there is to that person. It's just that sometimes the positive intention does not actually follow society's rules or whatever. But it is what it is. Our actions make sense to us. The only issue with that is that obviously then there's judgment and ego that start to interfere. But if you're aware of it, it's a lot easier. So let me turn my page. Another thing I want to talk about, which is a bit of that's what, you know, when I said sometimes people make things really difficult to understand. That was one of the things that I was reading and I found quite difficult to understand. So self-concept. The individual's belief about himself or herself, including the person's attributes and who and what the self is. In other words, who we think we are. And this guy was an American social psychologist. who's done quite a lot of work on all of this. And basically, what he tries to explain to us is how we have the existential self, which I read, is the most basic part of the self concept, the sense of being separate and distinct from others, and the awareness of the constancy of the self, which is from someone called B. Basically, it's when you're little and you realise that actually you are a separate entity to everything else, and for the rest of your life. So there's an element of consistency, and it's the relation that you have as a baby or a child and the world. You are a separate entity. Then you've got the categorical self, which means that we have different properties, for one of the better words. So our height, our weight, are we wide or not wide, our age, our gender, our skills. And this is kind of how we're defined in terms of psychology, as well as, sorry, as I said, it's a bit complicated. Three other things: the way we see ourselves, self-image, so the view of yourself, then how much value you place on yourself, so your self-esteem or your self-worth, and then what you would really want to be, so your ideal self. And we will look at all of those in more depth in week 4. But going back to this idea that we are the separate entity, which is true, we are, you know, our own brain and all the rest of it. That's what we've got, our map of the world and all the rest of it. But there's something that I want to say about this, because at the same time, whilst I agree with this, I also kind of disagree, because we are all matter, we are all atoms, and there's certain things that cannot be explained. And there's a lot of talks about us all being connected. You know, we all one. If we're atoms and the table is made like I am, just in a different way. Don't ask me too many questions because I don't really understand the physics of it. But we are all connected. How can you explain? You know, when you just know something about someone, or you know someone's not feeling well, or you know that they're in distress, you know, that kind of telepathic connection. I mean, we don't have it with everybody. I've got it very strongly with one person, where I just know when he's ill, I know when he's upset. It's, but how do you explain that if we are a separate entity? And that's why I wanted to mention it. Another thing I wanted to mention, which is a bit maybe difficult, is the you know, the different planes. Again, that becomes a little bit pushed and up there, but there's a lot of people who believe that there's different planes here. You've got the physical planes, which I'll go through quickly, or what we see, you know, as what this is. Then there's the astral plane, which is also known as the emotional plane, which could probably explain what I've just mentioned here. We've got the mental plane, also known as the causal plane, which is divided into others. And it keeps on going like this. You know, you've got unity plane, spiritual, divine, and then another one, I can't say the word, which is logoic or monadic. Still even a bit pushed for me. But one thing to say is that, you know, there's still things we don't understand about our brain and about the world. So whilst I agree that we are separate entities, and for the purpose of this exercise we go with that, but I also believe that we are all connected, which is how, you know, I will speak about the gut instinct in quite some depth at some point, but it kind of goes with that, if that makes sense. So one of the other things that I wanted to mention is, you know, when we say about the map of the world and how we filter information, but actually we are still taking it in, is just not to the fore. Think of dreams. You know, when we have dreams, we have really weird stuff sometimes. Like you have someone walking around with a dinosaur head or something, and, you know, you walk into a room and you end up somewhere that's completely different, and that doesn't make sense. And when people, you know, say to you, oh, I had a weird dream last night, and they start to explain it to you, it's always something that's a bit out there. And yet, I don't know if anybody has ever done or had hypnosis done to them. But especially in what I do in terms of NLP, we use something called submodalities, and it's to change like one state to another. So for instance, let's say fear of going out, or fear of any kind, germs, whatever, and we try and turn it to something that's no longer a fear. And when you ask a person to describe what that fear looks like, it's a bit like a weird dream. It's never, you know, something straightforward, or what we would call something straightforward. And it's actually how I know whether I'm talking to the conscious or the unconscious, because if a description is a bit too logical, the person's not under properly and we need to start again, sort of thing. If it's a little bit out there, I know I'm onto something, in a nutshell. So that's why, again, you know, yeah, anyway, I stopped rabbiting on, but I do really think that we are all connected, because there's a state of consciousness or unconsciousness that does link us all. Another thing that makes us who we are is habits and routine. Now, we looked at habits last week, obviously in the sense, you know, what they are and all the rest of it. What I want to talk about now is not so much in depth about habit, but more why it makes us who we are. Because don't forget, a lot of it becomes an unconscious behaviour, but it's more about feeling safe. And obviously, it's all routine and rituals that we do is to make us feel better and reassured. That's why people don't like the routine to be changed, or why kids need a routine so that they know what's happening next. You know, they have a bath and then they have this and blah, 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 and then they go to bed. Because otherwise, if it's all over the place, they can't, you know, the brain can't adjust to it. They need that kind of like safety and security of knowing what happens next. Because not knowing what happens next, as we discussed, is that fear of the unknown, and we don't like that. We see change as threatening. And, you know, we will, again, run away from anything that is going to cause us pain or anxiety in any way. And we brush it under the carpet. So that's why habits and routine makes us who we are. If we also go back to Maslow, habits serve some of our needs, some of our, for instance, the physiological needs. You know, we need to eat. So you need a routine or a habit. You get into a habit of eating at the same sort of times. And then if you change jobs, or if something changes in your life, your habit or routine will be adjusted. And, you know, we do what we do in an attempt to meet all our core needs, the conscious and unconscious ones, and whether they're met or not. For instance, you know, when I was little, if I needed to ask my dad something, I would never ever ask him before he ate, because if he was hungry, he would not say yes. That was a guarantee. I'd get a no as an answer. So I would always wait until after he's eaten. And actually, I find that works for most people. I know it works certainly for me. And I know that when I coach people, I always say to them, do never, ever, ever have a difficult conversation before you've both eaten. Let's not forget that some of our decisions and what we do are also affected by our own human core needs. So if you're tired or hungry, yeah, you will be more grumpy. It's just the way it is. Another thing I want to talk about is that perception is projection. That's another NLP thing, but basically to recognize something, you must have experienced it before. For instance, another one of my clients, through various circumstances, I'd never experienced pride because of the way he was brought up, which was in a boarding school, and is, you know, yeah, everything after that. His parents had never really shown him that they were proud of him, and because said boarding school was a bit strict, it was more about pushing yourself to do better. But there was never any sort of care, or in that sense of like, oh, you know, we're really proud you've done really well. There was no, there was no such thing. And as a result, he's never experienced it. So he's now a bit older, and one of the things he's trying to do is find purpose and kind of a sense of achievement in his life, and he's finding it really difficult because he's never experienced pride. So how can he? And this is the thing, he can, because he will at some point, and I know that because very recently, I had a new emotion thrown at me, and I didn't actually know how to process it to start off with. So to recognise something, you must have experienced it before. That's what I said about the example of when we learn by a one-off event, i.e. the knife or the frame when you're a child. Well, for me, for instance, I got offended. I don't think I've ever been offended before. I was upset, I've been angry, I've been many things, but offended was a first. And I genuinely did not know how to, I didn't know how to process it. But now I'd probably be able to recognise that behaviour in others too. I couldn't before because it wasn't even really a word that I would use because I'd not actually experienced it. And yet, let's not forget that the moment you form an opinion about anything or a person or an idea of any kind, it becomes your perception. That's what it is. So I think in summary, I'd say that, what makes us or do what we do or why we do what we do, whatever I called it, but the essence of it is that everything that we see, that we feel, that we hear from the outside is processed by our brain and then represented internally. And that's what makes us do what we do. It's the upbringing, and it's our own map of the world. It's also our own self-talk, which is what we're going to talk about now. So what is self-talk exactly? Well, it's that inner voice, isn't it? It's the one that never shuts up, basically. And we need to remember that everything that we say to ourselves is extremely important and actually matters. Because the self-talk can be actually really damaging. And the way to understand it better, I would say, is the combination of your conscious thoughts with all your unconscious beliefs and biases and values and everything else. And it's the way your brain is going to interpret and process your daily experience. As you know, it can be quite joyful and supportive. It can also be extremely negative. And for most people, it is negative. We normally go to negative as a rule. I'm not sure whether it's because of society, because, we certainly not, as a rule, I don't think of the word train, but train's the wrong word. We don't want to be seen as being full of ourselves. So, some people are quite arrogant and we'd be quite happy to be like that. But most of us, especially in certain cultures, I would say certainly, for instance, in England, a lot more so than in other countries, you downplay some of the achievements, where maybe in America, they would actually, be shouting about something because we're really proud of it. So it depends where we come from. It depends on, our environment and culturally where we are in the world. It's also, I guess, because of a criticism, because of other people's experiences and maps of the world. And, we kind of used to being criticised. I guess it comes from school as well, when you're younger and they're like, no, you didn't do well enough, go back and do it again. And I think it's also a natural thing. If someone pays you a compliment, a lot of the time you're probably going to be, oh, thank you. You're happy that you got complimented, but you probably get less compliments than you would criticism. And criticism is not always like a direct thing. And I think that, in fact, we feel that we're being criticised all the time, and we are, but by ourselves, because that's what we do. We just keep on saying, just today, the number of times where I've called myself stupid, fat, or whatever, just because I did something, I don't know, it was a bit clumsy, I suppose, but, you straight away, you attack yourself for not being perfect. And it's a natural thing to do. That's just what we do. And again, you need to remember that we are all human. That's why, as long as you can catch yourself thinking, oh, you're stupid, whatever, what did you do that for? If you can catch yourself, then it's not going to affect you as badly as if you don't. Because if you call yourself whatever, but you realise you've done it, you're like, oh yeah, I was being a bit unfair on myself here. But if you've done and you constantly live in that negative world, then that's when self-talk can be quite damaging. We forget how important it is, because the conversation that you have in your own head will influence how you feel about yourself, as well as the way you respond to things. So if you are, for whatever reason, really grumpy, and you've woken up that way or whatever, or someone's offended you, like you did me, or whatever, it's going to affect how you respond to everything that happens to you. So that's when you're probably going to notice that every single bloody traffic lights turn red. That's when you're going to start dropping your glass of water, or, listen, I'm a bit clumsy, I'm using examples like that happened to me. If you start then, having to interact with other people and you're really grumpy, if it's someone that's close to you, unfortunately, you're probably going to carry on in that tone. But if it's someone you don't know very well, you might make an effort. Either way, that's why you need to understand where it's coming from. And I'll talk about it a bit more in a minute. But first, let's talk about rumination. Rumination is when you, it's constantly, it's replaying in your head over and over and over again. It's upset you, and instead of trying to snap out of it, even if you try to snap out of it, you can't. You need to just, it's going round and round and round and round. And it happens to the best of us. If something, upsets us, or we're not really happy about it, the reason why we keep on thinking about it is actually because we're trying to find a way out, shall we say, or we're trying to make it acceptable. We're trying to find a way to accept it and then process it and park it. For me, for instance, a bit like a bad dream. If I have a bad dream, I will force myself to go back in the dream and find an outcome that I'm happy with. And the reason why I do that is to not repeat the dream, and also not to carry it with me all day, because that's happened in the past. And I've found that going back in the dream consciously and being like, right, so what would I want the outcome to be, instead of like, I don't know, being shot or whatever, mad thing happened in the dream that wasn't pleasant. And you turn the outcome to what you want it to be, and then I find that it helps. Well, it helps me anyway, but I know it has helped others too. And I think that's why we ruminate, is because we can't comprehend from our map of the world why that person has done that thing to us, or has said that thing, or whatever it is. And I had one again only a couple of days ago, but I now know what to do to deal with it. And for me, it's to voice it, because, and I find for most people anyway, because if you don't voice it, you keep on thinking, because you're processing, basically. You're processing, you're trying to find a way to make it acceptable. So you ruminate, and you're getting nowhere, and it's making you feel worse. And you kind of really, the feelings and the frustration get worse, and everything gets worse, and you get really, why did that person do that? Because it's not acceptable to you, and you can't comprehend it. So you need to comprehend it. So how are you going to do that? As I say, for me, it's to voice it, because once I've voiced it, it's out of my head. So it's not like just going. And secondly, if I voice it, obviously not to the wall or to the cat, I need to voice it to an actual person. If I voice it to someone, then they will offer their opinion, their advice, or whatever, which is not required, if I'm honest. But because they're giving you a different perspective, you can start to go, oh yeah, okay, so that makes sense then. So I can now park this, because I've spoken about it. I still, haven't got a real reason as to why these things happened and why it's upset me so much, but at the same time now I can park it, which is what you want to do. And, for a lot of people, self-talk is just the voice of judgment. It's the voice of doubt. It belittles you, and it beats you up quite a lot. So self-talk, it's not just what you say to yourself, but it's also how you say it. And in any language, there are some assumptions even, which we all unconsciously believe to be true in order to actually understand what is being said. It's important to understand as well the power of the words, or how we use these words, and how they can affect us a lot more than we realise. So we're first going to go into the linguistics of it, which don't get too scared. It's not that painful. but it's understanding the words and the markers that are used. So for instance, we have existence. So we use these words that would be nouns that make it alive, that make it a thing, as it were. We use certain things, presupposition. They're called presuppositions, basically, linguistic presuppositions or assumptions. And there's one that's of possibility or necessity. There's also one that's cause and effect. So it would be, for instance, the verb makes, or if blah blah blah, then blah blah blah, or because. And they're little words that we use that make language, in essence, work, but also make us understand language. Complex equivalence would be something like it is this, or it means that. Then you've got awareness, so verbs of awareness. It would be, for instance, see, hear, notice, sense, smell, taste, things that you can relate to and your brain can absorb. Then time, so it would be the tense of a verb, whether it's in the past or in the future. Stop, now, yet, or anything that relates to giving you a timeline of some description. Then you've got the adverbs or adjectives that just describe the way something is, and then whether something's exclusive or inclusive, so and, or. And then the order, so that would be a list, it would be a position in the list, it would be first, second, third, fourth, that sort of thing. And the reason why that is because in language, there is a structure, there's a deep structure, and there's a surface structure. And the deep structure is basically the words that we say, and the surface structure is basically not everything that we mean. So what I mean by all I've just blurbed at you, so that's a difficult bit out of the way, now I'm going to put it in English, is that what we choose to use determines the outcome. So for instance, something that you're going to see straight away, but it's an assumption. He does this, therefore he means that, right? So I've just said, I'll give you a proper example. He never smiles at me. That means he doesn't like me, for instance. There's actually no correlation to the fact that, there's two different sentences here. He doesn't smile at me and he doesn't like me, but I've made a cause and effect thing. Because he doesn't smile at me, it means that he doesn't like me. And I've just done it again just by using the word because, which is, do you see what I mean? When you start to actually look at the way a sentence is constructed, we create certain assumptions, even in our unsafe talk or when we're talking to other people. And the thing to understand, and that's where the dip structure and the surface structure is important to just mention, if anything else, is that a bit like the way the brain absorbs information and can absorb everything, we can never say the whole of what we are thinking, even to ourselves, because it's too much, it's too long. Some of it would be irrelevant. And that is why we have deletion, distortion, and generalization from when we speak, also when we listen to somebody else. So let's now look and explain to you more about language patterns. Now, there's actually a download which is called Language Patterns, and basically what I'm just going to go through now. This will probably change the way you also listen to other people, because you will start to be able to pick up some of these words and how they've got an implication and how they change the sentence completely. So, for instance, we've got here, you must think I'm stupid, which is a mind reading, a distortion. How do I know? What's giving me the impression that person must think I'm stupid? He wants to humiliate me. How do I know? How do I know that? I'm assuming that his behaviour makes me think that's what he wants to do, but that is probably couldn't be further away from the truth. we need to remember as well that the deep structure is made up of feelings and images, and words aren't precise enough. So when we say, for instance, he wants to humiliate me, it's a feeling coming out. It's an image of, like, you know, embarrassment or whatever, and that's what sometimes comes out. It's not, you know, I'm feeling very scared that I might get embarrassed. What comes out is he wants to humiliate me, because it actually represents what the image is in my head. So these language patterns are called meta model, and basically, I just read it out. It's a way of recovering all the deletions, the distortions, or the generalizations that we make in both the deep structure of what a person is saying, and also in the person's model of the world, so in the map. It reminds us to also be aware of our own distortions, deletions, and generalizations, because the generalizations, because it's easier, we're leaving out stuff that feels irrelevant, but actually it may not be. So if I give you another example of a generalizations, it would be something like things never go right for me. Really? Nothing's ever gone right for you, has it, or hasn't it? Or when you say everyone's doing it. Well, first of all, who is everyone? Secondly, you know, where are they? What is it they do anyway? Or you say something like, oh, dogs are vicious. All dogs? There's not one dog in the world that's not actually not vicious, and that's like just a fluffy ball of hair. And do you know what I mean? So we do it a lot. Then there's things like I can't stay now. Why? What's stopping you from staying now? You know, we use a lot of words, and we don't always understand the implications. When you start, I mean, obviously I'm not going to go through every single example that's on that list, but you've got it, and when you go through it, you'll see exactly what I mean, and how you can really challenge some of the things that people say. Because there's also the sense of belief. Is, for instance, we're going to go into negatives in a bit, and I'll give you an example then. But it's not just what we believe in, it's also sometimes we have a choice. And for instance, if I say I can't sing, the truth of it is it's not so much that I can't sing, it's just that I'm not enjoying it enough to go and have singing lessons. So I'm not going to say that to people. I just say I can't sing. Again, you know, who's decided that I can't sing? I just think that the sound of my own voice when I'm singing offends my ears. Therefore, I don't sing unless I'm on my own and the music is really, really loud so I can hear myself. So, you know, but I'm not going to say that to people. I'm just going to say, oh, I can't sing. Do you see what I mean? And straight away, the can't doesn't mean that I can't. It just means that I can't be bothered, really. I don't want to do it, is more what it means. Other things that we might say would be like, oh, I handled that quite badly. And you're like, well, compared with what? What's badly anyway? What would have been better? And it's what I'm trying to say. It's not just like when we talk to other people, when we talk to ourselves, we say things like, yeah, I didn't do that very well, did I? Well, what is well, actually? What would have been better? What are you trying to say to yourself? You know, it's like, for instance, recording these things. I find it quite difficult because I am a bit of a perfectionist, and sometimes I'm thinking, oh, I didn't say that properly. Do I stop it and start again? But the problem is in terms of the editing, it's impossible for me to stop and start again because it's going to take me a week to just do 1 hour video. So sometimes you've got to shush the self-talk that says to you, you know, you could have done better. Well, you've done the best you could, considering, you know, you can't spend a week to do a 1 hour video. You haven't got the time. It's not possible. And readjusting. So if I'm thinking, for instance, oh, that video is not that great, I think, well, actually, no, what I need to look at, what is great and what isn't. And it could have been better. Maybe I could have waffled on a little bit less. But at the same time, you know, if people have learned something from it, then surely it is a great video. And that is what matters. So it's not quite reasoning with yourself, but a little bit. So how do you turn that negative self-talk to a positive one? Well, first of all, do you remember the exercise from last week, which was about finding the deep root issue? Well, it's kind of similar in a way, and you could actually use it for that. So what I've just explained to you, these language patterns, the meta model as it's called, this is what it's all about. It's about clarifying your own thought processes, because when you look at that sheet, you can actually see, right, when did I use that? When did I actually say that to myself? It's to understand what you are saying to yourself, but also what you're saying to others and what other people are saying to you. And sometimes it's about, you need to change the way you talk to yourself, obviously, but you can also change the way you talk to other people, because that will change the outcome and how we respond to you. And by becoming aware of your own map of the world, of all your unconscious beliefs and the thought processes even, it will actually help you to turn negative self-talk into positive, because now you can catch yourself doing it. And it is literally about being aware, because once you're aware, you can start to change it. So for instance, one of the exercises you have to do is it's a little self-talk diary. So just to record at the end of each day what thoughts you've had, and whether they're positive, negative, have you caught yourself doing anything or saying anything that you shouldn't have done. And it is to just, again, by putting on paper, you start being aware. So that's going to make you think during the day of, turning it into a positive. Negative words, as I was saying about my singing, this quote is quite famous from Henry Ford: whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And completely, it is all about what's in your mind. But I think sometimes we use negative words like, oh, I don't do that, or I can't do that. But what we really mean is, I don't want to do that. I have no interest to do that. And it's an assumption, isn't it? I can't do that. Well, why? Why? Because we have reasons or we have results. And the reasons are normally what is stopping us from getting the results. But it is a choice, and it's about asking the right questions. So, for instance, if you take a negative thought, let me just think of one quickly. So let's just say, I'm fat, right? And then what we do is that you go back up by saying that what is an example of blah, blah. So why am I fat? I'm fat because at the moment I'm drinking too much wine and I'm not exercising, for instance. Why, if we take me today, right? So I've put on a bit of weight. We'll tell you a bit more about that later on. But in essence, I'm struggling to lose weight. Why am I struggling to lose weight? Well, because I can't exercise. Okay. So why can't I exercise? Because of the operation I had. My belly is not, I can't walk very fast. I can't bend over properly. So really, if I think about it, am I fat? No, not really, not by anybody's standards. But the deep root cause of it isn't I'm eating too much. It's just at the moment I'm in a position where I can't do any exercise, and the only thing I can do anyway is to eat less, right? So do I do that? No, because I can't be bothered. So why can't I be bothered? Let's go back up. So I can't be bothered because at the moment I'm working too hard, and it's the only thing that actually makes me feel any better. Okay, so do you see what I mean? So actually my self-talk has got from I'm fat, and my deep root cause for like, I'm not really fat, by the way, but it's, we're talking about self-talk and how hard we can be on ourselves. But the deep root issue is that I'm working too hard. So I'm finding a comfort in eating what I want to eat and drinking some wine. What's the problem with that? I know that, and I also know that in 3 weeks' time, I won't be working as hard as I am right now. And I also know that in 6 weeks' time, said belly and some of the issues will be actually clearing. So I will be able to start to exercise. So instead of like beating myself up, I just think, no, you do what you can, a little bit at a time. And in 6 weeks' time, you'll be able to properly start exercising again and do whatever. So it's turning it on its head. If you use another example, for instance, I can't think of one. It's typical, isn't it? What could I think of? No, I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything at all. But I think you're getting my point anyway. You know, negative words, as soon as you catch yourself saying I don't or I can't, try and find out why. Why can't you and why don't you? Is it because you really can't? Or is it because you're finding reasons because you don't want the results? Or do you want the result enough, therefore you can? It's all about analysing what it is you're actually saying to yourself, because sometimes we actually don't want the result, as it were. If we take the example, which was also weight related, that I used last week about the lady that was doing this exercise, and actually what it was is that a doctor wanted her to lose weight. She didn't, you know, so that's probably why she can't lose the weight, because actually she doesn't want to. So she's finding all sorts of reasons as to why she's not going to achieve the results. So unless she actually changes that and wants to lose the weight, for her it was like for health purposes, and changes the way she's looking at it, it's not going to happen. And we do that all the time. I heard someone else one day saying that, oh, you know, I'm not intelligent enough for this than the other. There's no such thing as not being intelligent enough. You might find it more difficult than someone else, but so what? You just read the thing or you watch the video more times, and you know, there's no such thing. It's how you believe things to be. So I mention quickly the law of attraction. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's basically that we are like magnets, and that like attracts like. So if you're negative, you'll attract negative stuff. If you're positive, you'll attract positive stuff. I don't completely agree with all of it. I agree with some of it. It's very true that if you're negative and you moan all the time, the people around you are unlikely to be highly positive people, because they're going to get bored with it. At the same time, I completely disagree with when you're really negative to force yourself to be positive, because that never works. And actually, it will make you feel worse. Completely worse, because you'll be completely incongruent and you won't be true to yourself. And sometimes it is about understanding the reason behind the grumpiness. So if you wake up grumpy, like I was saying earlier on, can't remember the context, is try to find why. Is something offended you? Is something really pissed you off? You know, why is it? And if you know what it is, and you then you can start to deal with it. And it's better to be negative for a couple of days rather than pretending to be positive and burying your head in the sand. So finding why you're feeling upset is key. And then if it's something that's going to take a bit of time to get over, you take that little bit of time to get over it, and you deal with it properly, and you grieve whatever it is, or you process it in your own time. There's actually nothing worse, I think, that to pretend to be positive. It just really, really does not work. But at the same time, I do agree that if you believe something, it will probably happen. So if you believe that you're never going to be successful, it's unlikely that you will be successful. If you believe that you are going to succeed and achieve what it is you want, then same principle. The law of attraction in that way, I agree with. But that everything is going to materialise or not going to materialise if you're a bit negative a couple of days a week. Well, again, it's finding why you're negative. That's all I want to say. You know, it's okay to not be 100% positive all the time. It's not natural to be. We are human beings. It is about what you focus on. So, for instance, if you take me with my belly, at the moment, what's the point of me looking at it? I know I can't do anything about it. I can't do any sit-ups, I can't do anything. So instead, I will look at another part of my body that I quite like, so that, you know, then I feel a bit more positive. Because if you always look at the one thing that you don't like, especially when you're just about to talk about control, but at the moment I have no control over that part of me. I can't do anything with it. So what do I want to do? Make myself grumpy regularly and focus on something bad, or make myself feel better? And that's what the law of attraction for me is. It's where you put your focus. Yes, bad things happen. That is life. But you can choose to wallow in them, and then that's when nothing's going to happen and you will be negative for the rest of your days. Or you can focus on something else. Still deal with that bit, that's not great, but focus on something else to give you that oomph to keep going, basically. You know, what was it I read or I heard? This is it. A mood can become a state of being. I won't go into the example he gave because it was really too long-winded, but if you stay in a mood for long enough and you keep on like reasserting it to yourself, it will become you, and it will be you. Another thing that you can do to change the negative into positive is to reframe. We mentioned this before, but basically all meaning is context dependent. Nothing is bad. We go back to language patterns. What is bad anyway? What is good? So it depends on the context of the frame you view the situation. It can be difficult. I mentioned something later on about my own situation the last year, but sometimes actually, if you completely change the way you look at something, you can turn it into something that creates opportunities for you as opposed to hinder you. What you need to remember is that self-talk is very important in so many ways, because it is kind of a script of your life. It is constant in your head, and if it's constant negative chatter, you're going to start to develop automatic thoughts that will always lead you to negative emotional reaction. That's what we're saying of a mood becoming a state of being. And that's why, yes, address what is upsetting you and the negatives. You can't turn everything into a positive, not straight away anyway. You can probably over time, but not straight away. You need to recognize when things have to be addressed. And that leads me on quite nicely to talk, sorry, that was supposed to be the script of your life. But it's true, it is an empty blank book. You write it, it's you. No one else is writing it for you. It's your own self-talk, no one else's. Now that you've got the tools to understand how you can change some of the verbs and all the rest of it and some of the words that you use, then you can start to make a conscious effort towards having more positive self-talk and start to write a more positive story. What I meant to say is it leads us on nicely to control. So, for instance, that is something that you can control if you choose to. We can't control everything, but that you can. So, first of all, I'd like to understand control, and that's the definition. As you know, I like to do a bit of etymology, and Google seems to be my go-to at the moment. So, control is really the power to influence or direct people's behaviour over the course of an event, but also we try to use control to influence the outcome in our lives, not just in other people's. So this is a subject quite close to my heart at the moment. I have really questioned free will and control in general over the last 3 years, but I think control does permeate our lives from a very, very, very young age. I think even as kids, there is a battle of will and a battle of power and control. When you've got the 2-year-old who say, no, I'm not doing that, or no, I'm not eating do you know what I mean? That refuses to eat or tries to interrupt. It's control. It's trying to, it's kind of a dominance thing. And I find even in animals, my cat can be really dominant and try to control me. So you just have to, with him, show him who's boss. After all, I've got the power of a fork. So I'm the one who'll feed him. So if he's naughty, then he won't get any treats, for instance. But what I'm trying to say is that control is everywhere, even with animals, in a way. And it's a very, very deep, deep, deep need within us. Because of power it can give, but also because it gives us a sense of certainty. It makes we always say we feel in control, so we're all right, because being in control means that, good things are going to happen and nothing bad. We go back to that fear. It's also, to us, control is an understanding that, things are going to work out. or we know where we're at. It's also kind of like being able to predict what's going to happen. I've got control, therefore this is what's going to happen. We don't want to lose control. You know, even when people say, oh, you lost control of a car, I think that kind of like highlights, you know, our fear of a loss of control. It's this car crash, quite literally. If we haven't got control, it's all going to go wrong. And I think it's also the reassurance that people and things and even who we are is consistent and safe and is not going to catch us, you know. And if we go back to Maslow and the pyramid of needs, again, the lower you go and the more important control is. You know, if you are right at the bottom, for instance, there's disease and being ill, it's a lack of control. That means you're not going to be able to go and hunt the buffalo, for instance. Do you know what I mean? So you needed to, even now, we don't want to be ill because it means we can't do anything. We've lost control of our lives because we're ill. And in terminal illnesses, what, you know, is it really the death that is the issue, or is it the fact we feel so powerless and that there's nothing we can do? Is that control's taken away from us? And I'm not sure which is worse in a way, because we all know we're going to die, but with a terminal illness, we kind of know that that's pretty soon. Where if we didn't have a terminal illness, we could still die tomorrow of a car crash, but at least we don't know about it. So we feel more in control. And it's all the going back to habits and the rituals that, you know, form control, because it is a routine. A child's routine is a form of control. You're controlling the outcome because they know how it's going to work. But it is, again, that reassurance and the familiarity that goes with it. And actually, control is a perception. I'm trying to change the slide. Yep, control's a perception. Actually, that's what slide is quite good to see how, you know, people look at different things from different ways, and that perception of the 6 and the 9, you know, they are both right. They are both right. But it's that perception. And in the one-to-one coaching that I do, I get a lot of people who suffer from anxiety, and I can guarantee you that for all of them, it's caused by control, and it's caused by the fear of losing control or not having control. Whether it's a fear of going out, it's a fear of germs, it's an anxious feeling at work, it's that fear, you know, my boss doesn't like me, so they might sack me. Again, there's no evidence of any of that. That's all self-talk and, you know, relating to what happened in the past and relating to our map of the world. But it creates an anxiety that is that lack of control, that fear. Fear is what control's about. You know, if I go back again to the caves and survival, we feel that if we have control, we risk less. So, you know, back in the caves, as I say, you know, you would have like tried to find shelter so that you're controlling your environment. Then you try to find a mate, for want of better words, but to reproduce, so that then you kind of like controlling your old age, and if you don't get killed, you know, you have kids that can look after you, sort of thing. With control, we feel like we risk less. Less what? Less threats, less attacks, less pain, less chaos. Where having choices gives us the idea of control. And I really say the idea of control. Control is something that you can do, for instance, with the self-talk. You can choose to record everything in the diary, spot the patterns, change the words in your own head. But you can control that. You can completely control that, 100%. But there are other things that you can't control at all. And I think sometimes this idea of control is, for instance, with a child and parents. The decisions are made for the child. And the parent will say, you know, because obviously you teach them how to make choices and control and stuff. So the child will have an input in certain things, but ultimately the parent is still in control. For instance, going to school. you know, if a child doesn't want to go to school, you can make that choice all he likes, but the parent, you know, we make that child go to school. And I think once you become an adult and, you know, you've been controlled all your life, you think that you are in control. And I think for me, certainly, freedom has always been really, really important. And certainly when I came to adulthood, it was like, yeah, I can do what I like now. And you know what? It's not really the case. You can't really do what you like, but you've got this idea and perception that actually you're in charge of your own destiny. And you're not. But before we go on to that, let's look at how we make decisions, really. And there's an element of gut instinct. As I say, we'll go into depth about that next week. But if you've got all these doors in front of you, how do you know which one to take? You don't know what's behind any of them. You know, behind one could be something really nice. There's a nice holiday. Behind another one is a monster. So how do you know? And I think, again, we're going back to Maslow and the choices with regards to the pyramids and our core needs. So there's certain choices that we make quite easily, like while we're eating. So, again, when you're on a diet, you know, you will make a choice. And then sometimes you go out and you can be really good, or you can eat something that's really bad. And you're making that sort of choice. That's your decision to eat whatever. And again, if you look at eating and eating disorders, for instance, there's a genuine link, again, between control and anxiety. There are lots of unconscious influences from our own map of the world and our beliefs and values that actually influence our choices. Sometimes we think we're making an informed choice, but we don't all the time. And there are different you know, schools of thoughts on this, and I will only touch on it very briefly, but there's something called marginal utility, and what that means is basically economics theory, and it suggests that every decision that we make is made so that we can reap the greatest benefits. In essence, it's a calculated risk. What you know, if I input that much into it, you know, what am I going to get? It needs to be like the most that I can get. Then the way we make other decisions is because of the way it's presented to us. So, for instance, you'd say that's in advertising or in supermarkets. There's a program, I can't remember what it's called now, but basically they go around to people's houses and they look at how much they spend on food. And what they found is that a lot of these people go for the same brand week in, week out, because that's what they were given as a child. They've never tried anything else. They just like keep going. You know, that's an unconscious continual choice, a habit. So you could argue, is it a choice, or is it just because the advertising team was good with the parents when they were little and that's why they're still eating that brand of cereal, for instance? It's also the if you take the environment, so the way a decision is presented to us would be when you walk into a supermarket and you've got that lovely smell of fresh bread that's being baked on the premises. That actually is to impact the way you shop, where they put stuff again. So we think we make decisions sometimes, but sometimes we literally are on autopilot and we don't really, or we absorb what we're seeing on TV or whatever, and we're just going by it. There's obviously the social influences, like, you know, a lot of us can be a bit sometimes like sheep. If people are doing it, I want to do it too. And you see it with kids, where you've got this craze of there's toys. This year is this, and last year was whatever, the thing that flips. I can't remember what it's called. So, you know, you make decisions, but not always. It's the idea of control and the idea that you've made a decision. It's also in the phrasing sometimes of a question that you we make a decision one way or another. For instance, I read somewhere online that it's especially important in a referendum, and the way that the question is asked, the subtle, I'll read it because I wrote it down, the subtle phrasing of a closed question has been found to affect people's choices, because basically they've been framed to behave in a certain way. We can, again, question, or not again, because I've not mentioned it properly yet, but sometimes that's what makes me believe and question whether we have any free will or not. So what do we see as free will? It's supposedly, again, there's different schools of thought on that one, but it's the ability to choose between different possible course of action and unimpeded. So really, the capacity to make a choice where the outcome's not been determined by past events, I suppose. So making a decision where you've never been in that situation probably would be free will. There are some schools of thought where they believe that there's actually only one course of event that is possible. And I guess, I don't know if anybody's seen the Adjustment Bureau, but there's a point where the chap who's there to make sure that everything goes to plan and according to destiny, or whatever you want to call it, where he actually says, you know, you think you've got free will, you've got I can't remember the exact word he uses, but it's the perfect word. You've got the impression of free will or something. You can buy, you know, what toothpaste you want, and you can choose the colour of your jumper in the morning or what car you drive, but that's as far as it goes. And that, you know, free will has been taken away from us because as a race, the human race, we are too dangerous with it. It's been a philosophical dilemma for centuries. And what sort of free will do we have? You know, if I share something a bit personal, 3 years ago, I had a nervous breakdown, and actually it really feels like everything was stacking itself up to push me. It was like everything I was trying to do to succeed and all the rest of it. It was like pushing water uphill. Everything I touched didn't work. Everything I didn't touch also didn't work. It didn't matter what I did. It was like I was being pushed and pushed and pushed towards the inevitability of, you know, crashing and being on the floor and right at the bottom. And it didn't matter what I did. Nothing could change that outcome at all. And I've questioned it. I really have, because I was just thinking, why does it have to be this way? I'm trying so hard and nothing's happening. But sometimes it's because we're being pushed in a particular direction, and it's a direction that I would not have seen, or I would not even probably have envisaged if I'd not been through the nervous breakdown. And to me became, you know, right, okay, so I'm now in this situation, I need to deal with it, but I refused medication. I wanted to sort it out myself. I wanted to get to the deep root cause, because I'd nearly been there before and I'd managed to avoid it then. This is me again, wanting control, isn't it? But I got to the deep root causes, and obviously I'm not going to say I'm hoping. Basically, there's certain things I can't do to myself. I can do it with clients, like the hypnosis stuff, but I can't do it to myself, because you can't consciously talk to your unconscious whilst being unconscious and consciously talking to your unconscious. It's impossible. So I knew I'd be tested at some point, and I'd learn whether what I'd done would work or not, and he did. So I'm happy with that. But what I'm trying to say is that we know that we don't have that much control as we'd like, but we kind of still strive for it. And, you know, despite the fact no control around all the events around me, I was still trying to get control. And actually, the more I tried, the less I got it, if I'm completely honest with you. And that was just like control over my situation. But a lot of the time, people try to control over people. And, you know, because obviously what other people do has an impact on us. And they try to control what the outcome is going to be. And we know we can't control anyone. We can't change people. We can't control them, but we still try it. And if I give you an example, because it's just the best, it's in my book, and it's what someone had said. Basically, he was in a relationship and she left him. And his exact words were, "I didn't say how I felt, but I fear she would leave me. I thought that if I tried to control the situation, it would be okay, and yet the outcome is still the same. I should have been myself regardless." But what he tried to do was to control the situation, so that by manipulating the way things were, she wouldn't leave him, and yet she left anyway. But you know, we wrongly believe that control leads us to happiness. We think that control is going to get us to where we want to be, but actually, trust me, it doesn't. It really doesn't. And yes, for certain forms of control, you need to have, like with the self-talk, you know, with certain things that we do, we need that control, and we can control certain things like that. But there are others, especially when it's depending or dependent even on environment or situations of people. You've got no control, absolutely none. And I personally believe that the best way, sorry, I think there's been a little glitch here. I think the best way to be is actually to let go. Letting go of control is probably the best way. It's easier said than done. It's really difficult, but it's actually key. But as I was explaining with the nervous breakdown, and how, you know, sometimes things are so difficult and we keep on trying, nothing happens. It's normally because we're going down the wrong route, as it were. We're trying to push an outcome that actually isn't to be. So, you know, what we resist persists, is what Carl Jung said. And the more we try to get our own way, as opposed to maybe another, this other way is going to keep on coming to us until we actually, oh, look, with me, I was right at the bottom of it, right, okay, I give up. I see what happens, because I can't be doing with this anymore. And actually, letting things unfold is probably the best way. But there are times where life happens and it's like dominoes. It just falls. It's one after the other, and you've got absolutely no control over it. No control at all. If I give you an example about my last year, and you understand what I mean about the dominoes. So I'll just give you the nutshell of it. But in a nutshell, it started with a miscarriage. Things went straight forward. I ended up having an emergency operation 6 weeks later. Then I was still in a lot of pain. They started talking about potential endometriosis, infertility. Then I was in the gym trying to relax, and I was nearly sexually assaulted by 5 gypsies. In the midst of this, 6 weeks later, I was still in the same gym, and different 3 gypsies who wanted to, I quote, smash me in. Probably because I hadn't actually dated properly in the first episode, if I'm honest. And that probably triggered the second one, in a way. Although, you know, what they did and where they were, I could not have made up. But my reaction to it, basically, I shut the door in my face. So they didn't take very kindly to that. But I wasn't going to get them in because they weren't members, and I was on my own, which they also didn't know. But I didn't know they didn't know that, because in my brain the reaction was like, if I let them in, they are going to rape me. And they obviously didn't. They were just there to cause trouble. But I ended up in a really dodgy situation as a result. And whilst all this is still ongoing, I'm still in pain, and I ended up having another operation. Because one consultant thought that it could be cancer. Actually, it wasn't. They found it was endometriosis. It was everywhere. It was in the bowel. Operation took 3 hours. So it all amongst the organs, and to make it better, they basically induced the menopause. So what I'm trying to say is that over all of these events that happened within hardly 6 months of each other, the dominoes were really falling. And every time something else happened, I was like, really? You know, give me a break. And no, I didn't. It just kept on falling down. And all I could do, the only thing I could control was my response to it. I couldn't control the events. That was completely out of my hands. But I could control how I was going to react. And that's what I did. And when I said about reframing earlier on, sometimes things over menopause, you know, not overly happy with that. But what can I do? Nothing. So what I've done is I've used myself as a case study to, you know, with the NLP and all the rest of it, and getting the hormones levels right. And actually now, in terms of work, I'm getting a real interest, because of the way it was induced so quickly. It wasn't just drip, 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 like naturally. It was like, plonk is the pellet inside your belly, and off you go. So from 1 minute to the next, it was like hormones attack. And actually now it's something that I'm going to be doing as part of my work, because I'm being asked to do talks on the menopause and how I've dealt with it. So if I can help people as a result of what's happened to me, then it's a bonus, isn't it? So it is about reframing it. I'm now, in a way, kind of glad it happened, because it means that other people will benefit from it. And there you go. So yeah, letting go is probably the only thing you can do, because if I just try to control, well, I cannot control any of it. You know, to me, letting go is the right way. Maybe the way is to go for me, you know, in terms of work. I'm being pushed in a direction which wasn't necessarily what I thought I wanted to do. Or I would never have thought I'd be doing stuff about menopause, you know, because of my age. So, yeah. Anyway, we need, oh, so, sorry, that was the photo I wanted to show you. So, obviously, as I said, I was in a lot of pain, and I started to put on weight. And when you look like that and you're trying to grieve a child, it's not great. But that's why I had the second operation, and therefore potentially ovarian cancer. But we're kind of there. And I think, to sum up this week's content, I think you can now understand why you react the way you do, and also how to improve your self-talk. You understand what control is and how you make decisions, and that actually it's not about controlling outcomes, but it's more about controlling how you respond to events, which, you know, you will learn to do, because now that you're aware of it, it's being aware. We kind of know it, but until we're properly aware, we can't deal with it, basically. So in terms of homework, we've got all of this, so bear with me. So the progress sheet is basically about what you've achieved in the last week. It's also about what you would have liked to do but you didn't get a chance, and also what you'd like to achieve for next week. The weekly action sheet is about so first of all, remembering a situation where you made a decision that turned out to not be exactly the best. And obviously you've got hindsight, but what could you have done differently at the time, and why? And what advice would you give yourself so that you don't repeat the mistake? So what I mean by that is that sometimes we make the wrong decision, but we know it at the time. And when we make decisions that are, I'm going to say, of importance, not, you know, whether you're going to have baked beans on toast or pork for dinner sort of thing. But if I give you an example in my own life, there was a chap that I was seeing a few years back, about 6 years ago, and I'd been seeing him when I was 17. And when I started going out with him, I knew it was a mistake. And repeatedly, my gut instinct would tell me, you need to knock that on the head now. You're opening a can of worms. That can's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I didn't listen to it. So it is that kind of stuff. You've got the hindsight, but what could you have done differently when you made a decision that was actually a bad one? And the reason why I want you to revisit a bad decision is more to understand, if you're faced with it again, this time you listen to the right thing, as opposed to making the wrong decision and going against yourself. And the reason why I want this exercise to be done as well is also because we'll be talking about gut instinct next week, and it's to lead on to that, if that makes sense. I also want you to download something I've called the Tackle the Self-Talk checklist, and to keep it with you so that you can refer to it when you need it, as well as the Self-Talk diary, and to figure that out. So the Tackle the Self-Talk checklist I wanted to print to go through, but obviously I haven't. Top of my head, I can't exactly remember, but it asks you all sorts of questions about, you know, is this thing that I'm thinking true? Would I actually say such harsh words to a loved one? You know, that sort of stuff. and also using the language patterns download. Pay attention and spot the patterns you notice in your conversations with others and with yourself this week, and to record your observations. So that is it. I hope you have a good week. And next week, what we would be doing next week, we're doing understanding failure, which I can't say because there's an A in it, but you know what I mean. Understanding timing, gut feeling, and how to recognize the sign. Now, you see, I've just done it. I said I can't say O's. Actually, I could go and have speech therapy if I so wished, but I choose not to. So I could say them, but you see what I mean? And how you can catch yourself doing the language thing. So there you go. So have a good week, and see you soon.